Hello, everyone. I'm Stanley Smith, and each week at Conservative Coffee Hour, we take a look at different topics and different platforms, candidates, messaging, litigation, funding. This week, we had the pleasure of hearing from Rich Simon, who is launching a new platform called GroundForce. And this is a grassroots organization, and it's a platform for grassroots people to organize the grassroots. So we welcome that. We've talked about grassroots and how the idea is kind of a mixed bag. It's represents true diversity because it is a variety of people and we don't always agree. So Rich is tackling that that challenge of organizing a group of people, which is by very nature, by very definition, is kind of a disparate group. So we welcome that. He walked us through a number of different slide presentation cells, which outlined how he does this. Biggest takeaway for me was the idea of not focusing too much on all these topic areas, but focusing really on the strategy of accomplishing something, which again sounds a little bit more like a machine, which is part of the challenge, part of the tension between grassroots and operating and affecting change. That there is some systemic challenges of representing true diversity and then focusing it and exacting an actual outcome. So we're going to look at how that comes together. They're going to launch the platform next Thursday with a in-person and Zoom seminar where they're hoping to ideally focus on leaders, identifying leaders who want to lead up a group. And they also want to find participants in the groups to drive through a program area, and then also register potential participants on the site itself. So it's a three-pronged thing. The initial launch is primarily focused on identifying leaders. So we'll send the invite to that in the next email news. And also, real quickly, I did want to share, I sent the list to Frank as our graphic designer of our major talking points that we've come up with so far after about 9 months. And real quickly, the theme of party versus people, and the idea that both sides, no matter which side of the political coin you're on, basically if you talk to liberal people or conservative people, you're going to find that the overriding concern is nobody wants to lose their freedom or have their rights infringed upon. And no one wants to be ruled by a dictator. And these political divisions really serve the interest of the political parties more than they do the people. So similar to the GroundForce presentation, at the grassroots level, we really don't want to be arguing with ourselves. We want to focus on how we're being played by a particular party or narrative. And my quote, a summation of where I think we have been, is that at one time in the United States, we had two distinct political parties in this country. And one party was essentially for every moral and social issue. God love them. And the other, for good or for worse, had the moniker of being basically in favor of business. Again, whatever your focus is or whatever label you have, it's a blessing and a curse. But now we have the alliance of both parties, really in an unholy marriage with big business or big money. So it's kind of a distortion, and it has more to do with parties than it really does with us. So most of us who feel disenfranchised by the left or the right, it's for a reason, folks, because we're really not part of the conversation. Leadership, this is something that Frank, our graphic person, really brought up early on in the topic of words and the idea of using words like smart and talent and visionary, and they really correspond to how you're positioning yourself as a candidate and which office you're positioning yourself for. So some jobs in government really call for a leader, and some call for management, some call for problem solving. In the governor's race, I would say leadership and being a visionary would play. Maybe management is more akin to Secretary of State or clerk, someone who needs to manage things. And problem solving might be more akin to maybe police or school board level positions. So again, the words you choose and how you position yourself are not only effective, they also are appropriate to the position you're going to hold. I use the example of governor. I'm from Rockford, Illinois, and in our town, we had a storied company by the name of Woodward Governor. And Woodward Governor actually made just that. They made governors, and governors regulated the operation of machinery and airplanes and of rockets. And that's what you need. You need governance. Governance means moderating and weighing disparate situations and calling for things that represent and respect all the different viewpoints. Political spectrum is something we've defined in different terms. We've also called this party drift. It's the idea that no one is inherently all conservative or all liberal. One of our members, Eve Burdett, early on speculated in his estimation that probably only 20% of voters are what we call a hard R or a hard D. Most everybody falls somewhere in between. And under the topic of party drift, we also have the nuance that the parties themselves have changed. They've drifted and flip-flopped position from being more polar opposites of Republican Democrat to flip-flopping and becoming more liberal and conservative. Swing voters is something that Paul Schimpf brought up again recently, the idea that we do need to make an appeal, both parties have to and do make an appeal to swing voters, and this causes much frustration and angst on our side with the idea of the ever popular topic rhino, people who we view as being traitors to the cause, swinging over toward the more liberal leaning side of the electorate. And on the left, people who feel that people are just not radical enough. So it's a good topic, something to keep in mind. And then moderate. We don't hear about moderate very often, so I think most of us think it's unpopular, a distasteful idea. Sounds like you're waffling or can't make a decision. But again, just like the idea of being a moderator, discretion and weighing different disparate ideas and bringing them all together doesn't have to mean compromise. It can mean good government. Grassroots and versus machine politics certainly was front and center with the presentation from the ground force people today, organizing grassroots and making it work. So those are challenging things. Grassroots really represents diversity. Grassroots is messy, and it's not always the best organizational form. And obviously, I've got a typo there, isn't that lovely? Grassroots consists of real people. Machine politics on the other side is it's very effective oftentimes, but not really the way we'd want it to be. It can operate oftentimes as a patronage system, and we often hear how people on the left stick together. Good for them. And machine systems turn out votes. Patronage system is the idea that we all can be intimidated by the system, and speaking out, being in jeopardy of losing our job or friends or any kind of social connection. And then also when your job directly depends on how you vote, that's been brought up on the call a number of different times. It's a very frightening prospect. And when politics is focused on votes, not voters. We had Ken Griffin recently call out Kim Foxx and Lori Lightfoot and the rest of the politicians in the state as being overly focused on simply votes and not the people they're governing or their safety or well-being. And when it's all about outcomes and not about doing what is right, that's problematic. And a patronage system can work in many ways with direct and indirect impact on elections and public policy. Racketeering. We use the word corruption oftentimes in public discourse and on this call. I'm always looking for another word for corruption because I feel corruption as a word is very disempowering. So I have heard in the last couple of weeks the idea of racketeering. I've heard this term batted about, and I'm using that currently in our messaging platform as a placeholder for the word corruption. The idea that racketeering means getting something for something else, like paying money to elicit a response or a result. And that essentially, you could, in a broad context, you could make the case that is what corruption is and how it operates. So taxation without representation, cronyism, and patronage schemes. I think there's some legs to that topic of racketeering. And then these are older cells that were still under consideration. It's just the general statistical information that we have on any topic can be useful. So taking a look at death, we see higher numbers, heart disease, cancer, diabetes, flu, and lower really at guns and crash. So for all the press that gun violence gets, and of course, no one condones violence or death, it's pretty low compared to heart attack. Abortions has an asterisk by it because many people on the left have given me pushback that abortion should not technically be on our list of deaths per year because they don't consider that a death because they don't consider the unborn fetus a life. So good to know. You never know who you're talking to, but I thought that was good to know who I'm talking to in that particular instance. Indebtedness is the idea of just simply looking at our fiscal policy. This is a national quick view, but it pretty much paints the picture of financial situation across the nation. You can also look at your state and see how much money they spend per capita on individuals, what their public spending is. Tells many stories, many cautionary tales to be told. General takeaway is that in general, the federal government takes in about 3.4 trillion in tax revenues, and they spend roughly a trillion more. And this is really before COVID, but in general, they've always been overspending. So we've always been going into debt, and our national debt is 25 trillion. I think I did look up what our national domestic gross product is, which is I think about 23 or 24 trillion. So our debt is pretty much equal to what we produce every year in this country, which I'm not an accountant, but on a balance sheet doesn't sound as scary as I like to paint it. But again, take a look at the numbers. It can be very, very helpful. Quick, again, we've heard this over and over again, but seeing it, the idea most of the spending is mandatory. So this is kind of your patronage cronyism scheme where it's essentially most of the budget, most of the money is going to things that are already promised to people. Education is a topic we batted around quite a bit this summer. And it's basically the basic premise is get your kids out of school, get involved in the school districts, reform the school districts, and try to work to either reform unions or eliminate the stranglehold that teachers' unions. I don't want to say the teachers themselves have the stranglehold, but the administration, which facilitates the unions, really has distorted the goals probably that are closest to teachers' hearts and political gain of the union. Guns, again, a hot topic. We hear about this all the time. Guns, 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 death, death, death. We saw on the death chart. It's relatively low on the scale of deaths in the United States. Then when you really look at the topics of gun deaths themselves, 60% of gun deaths are suicides. And when you dig into it deeper with the police are involved in few of the shootings, and majority of the shooting victims are, of course, white. But again, it gets parsed out that the percentage of Black people within the total number is higher than the average. It's still, you need to take a closer look, deep dive at the numbers to really know what you're talking about. Climate change, we had John Cape on this summer. We've got quite a bit of data on climate change. The basic premise here is, yes, we all agree, we all believe in climate change. It's been happening since before we existed on the planet. And we know this from science. Science tells us from a geological record that the climate has changed throughout the history of the Earth in all different locations. The climate continues to change, but the idea that the climate change is based primarily on human activity is simply erroneous. Since the majority of climate change took place before humans arrived, logic would even tell you that. Science also tells us that. And again, we have presentation after presentation on climate change from John Cape. John has actually written a novel about the topic. So if you want a sexy thriller about climate change, just let us know and we'll hook you up with John how to buy a copy. And then Constitution, keywords and phrases, and analysis of freedom and other topics. So that was actually not a quick update, but it's where we are. We are indeed capturing all these conversations and ideas and as a resource so they can be captured and presented in a way that we can share them with the voters, candidates, funders, people who are litigating to help better define what the message is, the narrative. The presentation this morning focused again on local community news and media. Part of that starts with crafting a narrative which is accurate and smart and compelling, that really advocates for values that, in fact, the majority of people in this country advocate for, which are family and security, earning a living, and being able to have a healthy and productive and joyful life. So hopefully those are things we can all agree on and advocate for as we continue to work together. Look forward to seeing you at Conservative Coffee Hour. It's Conservative Coffee Hour is every Saturday morning at 10 a.m. Central Time. And if you would like to be invited, I will include my email address in the description, and I would be more than happy to send you an invite. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.